The night I died, my husband signed the papers. The hallway smelled like lemon polish and quiet money, the kind that lived in penthouses and never raised its voice. And I stood there in a black Maid uniform that didn't belong to me, balancing a silver tray that weighed maybe 5 pounds, but felt like a confession in my hands. My pulse ticking too loud in my ears, too loud for a place this controlled, this polished, this owned, and I knocked once because that was all protocol required. Soft, precise, forgettable, the kind of knock no one remembers. 5 seconds later, room service. I whispered, keeping my voice low, trained, invisible, because invisibility had kept me alive for the past 3 years, and for a second there was nothing, just the hum of climate control and the distant city 10 floors below. Then the lock clicked, a quiet, expensive sound, and the door opened. Time didn't slow. It fractured. Adrian Blackwood stood there in a crisp white shirt, sleeves rolled just enough to show control without effort. The kind of man who didn't need to prove anything, because the room already belonged to him, because the city already moved around him, because every decision he made echoed in places most people never saw. And his eyes, God, his eyes, found mine like they had been looking for me even when they didn't know I was alive. And everything inside me went still. I had rehearsed this moment 100 times in 100 different safe houses, cheap apartments, borrowed rooms with thin walls and thinner promises. I had practiced keeping my head down, my voice neutral, my presence small. But nothing prepares you for the moment the past steps back into your future and refuses to leave. Nothing prepares you for the man who buried you looking at you like you just walked out of his memory and into his reality. And for a heartbeat neither of us spoke. He didn't blink. I forgot how to breathe. 3 years collapsed into one look. I lowered my gaze first because I had to, because that was the role, because survival sometimes looks like surrender. Your orders, sir, I said, steady, controlled, a stranger's voice wearing my name like it had never belonged to me. And I felt his attention sharpen, not louder, not harsher, just deeper, like he was reading something written under my skin, like he was peeling back layers I'd spent years building. And then he said it, soft, disbelieving, dangerous in its quiet, Naomi. My name sounded wrong in his voice, like it had been locked away too long, like it didn't know how to exist in the present. And every instinct I had told me to walk away, to finish the job, to disappear back into the system that had kept me hidden. But my feet stayed where they were, anchored by something I refused to name, something that felt too much like unfinished truth, and I forced a small shake of my head. Just enough, just believable. I think you have the wrong person, I said, because lies had been my language for so long they came easier than breath. And for a second I almost believed it, almost convinced myself that if I said it clean enough, calm enough, the world would agree with me, that he would step back and let me go. But Adrian didn't move. He didn't need to. The space shifted anyway. It always did around him. He stepped closer, not fast, not aggressive, just inevitable, like gravity deciding to matter again. And the distance between us disappeared until I could see the faint line of a scar near his jaw. The one he got before everything fell apart, before we fell apart, before I learned that love and power don't share the same rules. And his voice dropped, quieter now, closer. You died. Not a question, a statement, a memory, a verdict. I swallowed, feeling the weight of every choice that led me here press against my ribs. And for a second the truth pushed up, sharp and dangerous, but I buried it where it belonged. People say a lot of things, I replied, still not looking up, still playing the part, because the moment I met his eyes again, everything would break, and I couldn't afford that. Not here, not now. Not with everything still moving behind the scenes. But then his hand moved. Not fast. Not forceful. Just enough to tilt the tray slightly. Enough to make me look up without touching me. Without crossing a line he didn't need to cross. And when my eyes met his again, I saw it. Not anger. Not relief. Something worse. Recognition. The kind that doesn't ask for permission. The kind that rewrites reality in real time. And I felt my control slip half an inch. Just enough to be dangerous, just enough for him to see it, and his jaw tightened, not in rage, but in understanding, like he was connecting pieces I had spent years scattering. And then, from somewhere down the hall, I heard it. Footsteps, too measured to be casual, too synchronized to be coincidence. My chest tightened, every instinct flaring at once, because I knew that sound, I had learned to recognize it in places where mistakes cost more than money, and I turned my head just slightly, just enough to confirm what I already knew without making it obvious. And when I looked back at Adrian, something in me shifted, because this wasn't just about the past anymore. This wasn't just about who we used to be. This was about what was coming, what had followed me here, what I had tried to keep away from him at all costs. And for the first time since the door opened, I broke character, just a fraction, just enough to let the truth leak through. "You need to close the door," I said quietly, and the way his eyes changed told me everything. He understood. Not everything. Not yet. But enough. Enough to know that whatever this was, whatever I had brought back into his world by showing up in that hallway with a 5-pound tray and a borrowed name, it wasn't finished, and neither were we. I knew the moment he closed that door, nothing in my life would stay buried. The lock clicked behind me, soft, final, and the hallway noise disappeared like it had never existed, leaving only the quiet hum of his penthouse and the sound of my own breathing, trying to stay steady, trying to stay controlled, but failing inch by inch, because Adrian Blackwood was standing less than 3 feet away and looking at me like I was both a ghost and a problem he had not yet decided how to solve. He did not rush me. He did not touch me. He just watched, and somehow that was worse, because Adrian had never needed to raise his voice or his hand to take control of a situation. He only had to exist inside it, and everything else adjusted accordingly. I set the tray down on the glass table between us. Careful, precise, buying myself seconds I did not have, because those footsteps in the hallway had not been imagination, and every second I stayed here increased the risk of them reaching this floor, of them connecting the dots I had worked so hard to scatter, and I forced myself to turn toward the door again. "You need to let me leave," I said quietly, not pleading, not weak, just factual, because survival was never about emotion, it was about timing. He did not move. "Who is out there?" he asked, voice low, controlled, the same tone he used when he was already 3 steps ahead of everyone else in the room. I shook my head once. "Not your problem." The words tasted like a lie the second they left my mouth. His eyes darkened slightly. Not with anger, but with something sharper, something that had always lived under his calm surface. "Everything that walks into my space becomes my problem." Of course it did. That was who he was. That was why I had left. I exhaled slowly, feeling the edge of panic press against my ribs, but I pushed it down, locked it where it belonged, because panic never saved anyone, and Adrian was still watching me, reading me, waiting for me to slip, and I could not afford that. Not yet. "Then consider this your warning," I said, meeting his eyes fully for the first time since the door opened, and the moment stretched, heavy, electric, because recognition was no longer a question between us. It was fact, undeniable, irreversible. His jaw tightened. 3 years, he said, quieter now, like the number itself carried weight. "You disappear. No explanation. No body. Just a report that says you are gone." His gaze did not leave mine. "And now you show up in my hotel wearing a uniform that is not yours, telling me to close my own door." I swallowed, the past pressing in, memories I had buried clawing their way back to the surface, but I held my ground, because if I let those memories take over, I would lose focus, and focus was the only thing keeping me alive. "I did not come back for you," I said, and even as I said it, something in my chest twisted, sharp and unwelcome. His expression did not change, but the air in the room did. "That is the first honest thing you have said," he replied. I almost laughed. Almost. Instead, I turned slightly, listening again, because the silence outside had shifted, and that was worse than noise. Silence meant they were closer, more careful, more certain, and my pulse picked up despite everything I had trained myself to control. Adrian noticed. Of course he did. He always noticed the details everyone else missed. "You are not afraid of me," he said, more observation than question. I shook my head. I never was. That was the truth. It always had been. His gaze held mine a second longer, then shifted, just slightly, toward the door, toward the space beyond it, calculating, measuring, adjusting, and I saw it happen in real time. The moment he decided this was no longer just about me. The moment he stepped into the situation completely. "Then you should start being afraid of whoever is out there," he said, and moved. Not fast, not dramatic, just precise. He walked past me, every step controlled, and I felt the shift in the room as if the air itself had changed direction, as if something invisible had taken its place behind him, something that did not allow chaos to exist for long. He did not open the door. Instead, he paused beside it, listening the way I had been listening, the way people do when they understand that sound carries information if you know how to hear it. And I realized then how much I had underestimated the situation, because this was his territory, his building, his space, and whatever was coming had just stepped into his world without permission. How many? He asked quietly. I hesitated. 1 second. 2. Then I answered, because lying now would not protect him. It would only make things worse. At least 2. Maybe more. His expression did not change. And they are here for you. I nodded once. Yes. Silence stretched again, heavier this time, filled with everything we were not saying, everything we had never said, everything that had broken us long before tonight. And for a moment I wondered if he would tell me to leave, if he would open that door and let me walk back into the danger I had brought with me, because that would be the logical choice, the safe choice, the choice that protected his world from mine. Instead, he turned back to me, and there was something in his eyes I had not seen in 3 years, something I had tried very hard to forget. You should have stayed dead, he said softly. The words landed hard, but not the way they were meant to. I stepped closer before I could stop myself, before logic could pull me back, before survival could remind me what this was supposed to be, and I met his gaze without hesitation. I did it for you, I said, the truth finally breaking through, sharp and undeniable. His jaw tightened again, but this time there was something else behind it, something that looked a lot like understanding fighting its way to the surface. Outside, a shadow moved under the door. Not loud, not obvious, but enough. Adrian saw it too. Of course he did. And in that single second, everything shifted from past to present, from memory to consequence, from what we had been to what we were about to become. He stepped forward, placing himself between me and the door without even thinking about it, without asking, without hesitating, and his voice dropped just enough for only me to hear. Then you are not leaving. My breath caught. Adrian, he did not look back. Not this time. The shadow under the door did not move like someone passing by. It stayed. And that was enough to tell me everything I needed to know. My chest tightened, not from fear, but from recognition, the kind that settles deep in your bones after too many close calls, after too many nights spent listening for footsteps that meant your time was up, and I felt it now, that same quiet certainty pressing in from the other side of the door. Adrian did not step back. He did not reach for anything. He simply stood there, one hand resting lightly against the doorframe, his posture calm, almost casual, but I knew him well enough to see the shift beneath it, the way his shoulders squared just slightly, the way his breathing slowed instead of quickened, like he was stepping into control instead of reacting to chaos. They know you are here, he said quietly. Not a question. Never a question with him. I exhaled slowly. They followed me into the building, not to the room. I replied, keeping my voice steady, because details mattered now. Timing mattered now. Everything mattered in a way it had not just minutes ago. His head tilted just enough to show he was processing that, adjusting, recalculating. So they are guessing. Yes. Silence again, but this one felt different. Sharper. Focused. The kind of silence that comes right before a decision is made. And I knew that look. I had seen it across boardroom tables, across quiet dinners, across moments when Adrian decided the direction of something that would affect more than just the people in front of him. And now that look was aimed at this situation, at me, at whatever was waiting outside that door. You should not have come here, he said finally. I let out a breath that almost sounded like a laugh, but there was no humor in it. I did not plan to. His eyes flicked to me, quick, assessing, and for a second I saw something almost human pass through them, something that remembered before everything became strategy and consequence. Then why are you here, Naomi? The way he said my name this time was different. Not disbelief. Not shock. Something quieter. Something closer to truth. I hesitated. Not because I did not have an answer, but because saying it out loud would make it real, would connect everything I had tried to keep separate, and once that line was crossed, there would be no going back to distance, to silence, to pretending we were not still tied together by choices we never got to undo. Because something bigger than me is moving, I said finally. His expression did not change, but his attention sharpened, like a lens pulling into focus. Explain. I shook my head slightly. Not yet. His jaw tightened, just enough to show he did not like that answer. Just enough to remind me that Adrian Blackwood was not a man used to waiting for information. You do not get to walk back into my life and decide the timeline, he said, voice still calm, still controlled, but edged now with something harder. I met his gaze without flinching. And you do not get to control everything that touches me anymore. The words hung between us, heavier than anything else that had been said so far, because they were not about the door, or the men outside, or the situation unfolding around us. They were about us. About what we had been. About what we had broken. About the space that had never truly closed. His eyes held mine for a long second, and then something shifted. Not outwardly. Not in a way anyone else would notice. But I saw it. The moment he chose not to argue. The moment he chose something else. Fine, he said quietly. Then we do this my way. Before I could respond, there was a soft sound at the door. Not a knock. Not a demand. Just a presence making itself known. My breath caught, and every instinct told me to move, to hide, to disappear into whatever space would give me even a second of advantage. But Adrian did not move, and something about that steadiness anchored me in place. Step back, he said, not looking at me, not raising his voice, just stating it like it was already happening. I obeyed before I even realized I had made the decision, taking 2 slow steps back, my pulse loud in my ears again, my mind racing through possibilities, through exits, through outcomes that did not end well for anyone involved. And then Adrian opened the door. Just enough. Not wide. Not welcoming. Controlled. Precise. The hallway light spilled in, soft and expensive, illuminating 2 figures standing a few feet away, both dressed like they belonged in a place like this. Clean lines, neutral colors, nothing loud, nothing obvious. But there was something in the way they held themselves that did not match the environment. Something that felt out of place in a building designed for comfort and privacy. Adrian did not step aside. He did not invite them in. He simply stood there, blocking the entrance without making it look like he was blocking anything at all. Can I help you? He asked, voice smooth, polite, the kind of tone that suggested this was a minor inconvenience and nothing more. One of the men glanced past him, just briefly, just enough to confirm what they were looking for, and my stomach tightened, because that glance was not random, it was intentional, it was searching, it was closing in. We are looking for someone, the man said, equally calm, equally controlled. Adrian's expression did not change. You have the wrong floor. The man's gaze returned to Adrian, and for a second the air between them shifted, not tense, not aggressive, just aware, like 2 people recognizing that neither of them was as simple as they appeared. We rarely do, the man replied. Silence stretched, and I realized then that this was not just about me anymore. This was about territory, about presence, about who controlled the space we were standing in, and Adrian did not need to raise his voice or make a move to make that clear. He simply stood there, unshaken, unmoved, and the weight of that presence filled the doorway in a way that made everything else feel secondary. Then I suggest you check somewhere else, Adrian said softly. The man held his gaze for another second, then gave a small nod, like a decision had been made, like a line had been drawn, and without another word, both men turned and walked down the hallway, their footsteps fading into the distance until the silence returned, heavier than before. Adrian closed the door slowly, the lock clicking back into place, and for a moment neither of us spoke. Then he turned to me, and whatever distance had existed between us before was gone. Now, he said quietly, you are going to tell me everything. The silence after the door closed felt louder than anything that had come before it. It pressed in from every direction, thick and unrelenting, like the room itself was waiting for me to break first, and Adrian did not take his eyes off me for a single second, not when the lock clicked, not when his hand dropped from the handle, not when the last echo of footsteps in the hallway disappeared completely. Now, he said again, quieter this time, but heavier, like the word carried weight that could not be ignored. You are going to tell me everything. I stood there for a moment, feeling the distance between who I had been and who I had become stretched tight inside my chest, because there was no version of this conversation that ended clean, no version that did not reopen things we had both buried, and yet here we were, standing in the same room again like the past had simply waited for us to catch up to it. I moved slowly, stepping away from the door, away from the line that separated danger outside from the complication inside, and I stopped near the window, the city spread out below like a map of decisions and consequences, every light a reminder of how many lives could shift because of the wrong move. 3 years ago, I began, my voice steady but quieter than I expected, like even the truth had to adjust to being spoken out loud again. The report you signed was not wrong. His expression sharpened slightly, but he did not interrupt. He never interrupted when something mattered. I let out a slow breath, feeling the memory rise whether I wanted it to or not. I disappeared because I had to. Not because I wanted to leave. Not because I stopped caring. Because staying would have put a target on you that you would not have seen coming. His jaw tightened, just enough to show he did not like the implication, that there had been something he did not control, something he had not anticipated, and for Adrian, that was not just uncomfortable, it was unacceptable. You are telling me I missed something, he said, voice still calm, but edged now with something sharper, something that cut closer to the truth than he wanted it to. I shook my head slightly. I am telling you I saw something before it reached you. His gaze held mine, searching, measuring, trying to decide whether to push or listen, and for a moment I thought he would stop me, demand specifics, demand names, demand control of the situation the way he always had, but instead he stayed quiet, and that choice alone told me more than anything he could have said. I continued. There were conversations happening behind your back, I said, choosing each word carefully, because details mattered now more than ever, people aligning themselves in ways that did not match the structure you built, not openly, not directly, but enough to shift things over time, enough to create cracks that you would not see until it was too late. His eyes darkened slightly, not with anger, but with focus, the kind that meant he was already running through possibilities, already mapping connections, already reconstructing the past 3 years with this new piece of information placed at the center. And you thought the solution was to vanish, he said. I let out a breath that felt heavier than it should have. I knew the solution was to remove myself before they used me to get to you. That landed. I saw it in the way his posture changed just slightly the way his shoulders pulled back like he was bracing against something he had not expected to hear. Used you how? He asked. I hesitated, not because I did not have an answer, but because saying it out loud would make it real in a way that could not be undone. Leverage, I said finally. You had enemies, Adrian. You always did. But this was different. This was not about territory or money or influence. This was about access. About finding the one thing you would not protect against because you never believed it could be used against you. His gaze did not leave mine. You. I nodded once. Me. Silence stretched again, but this time it was not empty. It was full of understanding that was still forming, still connecting, still building into something neither of us had fully seen before. So you let me believe you were gone, he said quietly. The words were simple, but the weight behind them was not. I met his eyes, holding steady even as something in my chest tightened. I needed you to believe it, I said. Because if you did not, they would not either. His jaw flexed, and for a second I saw something break through the control, something raw and unguarded that he did not let anyone see, something that had nothing to do with strategy or power and everything to do with the space I had left behind. You made that decision alone, he said. Not accusing, not questioning, just stating a fact that carried its own kind of consequence. I nodded. Yes. Another silence. He looked away first this time, just for a second, just long enough to gather something back into place before he turned to face me again, fully, completely, like whatever distance had existed between us was no longer relevant. And now, he asked, now you walk back into my life wearing a disguise and bring them with you. I exhaled slowly, the truth sitting heavy between us. I did not bring them here, I said. They found me again. And this time, I paused, feeling the weight of it settle fully into place. This time it is not just about me anymore. His eyes narrowed slightly. Explain. I shook my head once, the movement small but deliberate. They are not just watching me now. They are watching everything connected to me. Every place I go. Every person I get close to. His gaze sharpened instantly, the implication landing exactly where it needed to. Including me. Yes. The word hung there, final and undeniable. For a moment, neither of us moved, Neither of us spoke. And then Adrian took a step closer, closing the space between us with the same quiet certainty he had always carried, the same presence that made the world adjust around him instead of the other way around. "Then you made a mistake coming here," he said softly. I met his gaze without hesitation. "No," I replied. "I made a decision." His expression did not change, but something in his eyes did, something that looked a lot like resolve settling into place. "Then understand this," he said, his voice low, controlled, absolute. "If they are watching you, and you are standing here, in my space, then they are not just watching anymore." My breath caught slightly as the meaning settled in. He was not stepping back. He was not removing himself from the equation. He was stepping into it. Fully. Completely. The way he always did. "Adrian," I started, but he shook his head once, cutting me off before I could finish. "You said you did this to protect me," he said quietly. "Now you are going to let me do the same." And in that moment, I understood something I had spent 3 years trying to ignore. I had not just come back into his world. I had just pulled him into mine. "You do not get to protect me anymore," I said quietly, but my voice did not shake, even though something inside me already knew I had lost that argument the second I walked into his room. Adrian did not step back. He did not soften. He only looked at me the way he used to when he had already decided the outcome and the rest of the conversation was just a formality. "You lost that right when you walked through my door," he replied, calm, certain, final. The words settled between us like something permanent, something that could not be undone, and I felt the weight of it press against my chest because he was not wrong. I had crossed a line the moment I came here, a line I had spent 3 years avoiding, and now there was no clean way back. I turned slightly, needing space, needing distance, even if it was only a few feet across polished marble, and my eyes landed on the city again, on the endless grid of lights stretching out in every direction, each one a life untouched by the collision happening in this room. "You do not understand what this is," I said, softer now, not because I was unsure, but because saying it louder would make it feel too real. Behind me, I heard him move, one step, controlled, measured, closing the distance without rushing it. "Then make me understand," he said. I let out a slow breath, pressing my fingers lightly against the cool glass of the window, grounding myself in something solid before I turned back to face him. "It is not just a group of people," I said. "It is a structure. Quiet. Patient. They do not move fast. They move correctly. They wait until everything is in place, and then they do not need to force anything because the outcome is already decided." His gaze sharpened, interest replacing irritation, calculation replacing emotion, because this was the language he understood best. "And you are telling me they have been building something around me without me seeing it. I am telling you they have been building something that intersects with you," I corrected. "There is a difference." He held my gaze, considering that, weighing it against everything he knew, everything he controlled, everything he had built over years of decisions that had never been accidental. "And you are in the center of it," he said. I nodded once. I did not choose that. His expression shifted slightly, just enough to show he understood the implication, just enough to show he did not like it. "No one ever chooses the center," he said quietly. "They end up there because someone else needs them to be." The truth of that settled heavy in the room, and for a moment neither of us spoke, because there was nothing to argue, nothing to deny, only the reality that whatever was moving around us had already placed its pieces, and we were now part of the board whether we wanted to be or not. "Then you should send me away," I said finally, meeting his eyes again, steady, direct. "Before they decide you are part of it too." He did not hesitate. Too late. The words landed immediately, clean and absolute, and I felt something tighten in my chest because I knew he was right. The moment those men stood outside his door, the moment they looked past him and saw me inside, the line had already been crossed. There was no separation anymore. No distance. No safety in pretending this was contained. "Then you should at least consider distance," I pressed, even though I could already see the answer in his expression. "There are ways to handle this without putting yourself in the middle of it." His gaze did not waver. "I am already in the middle of it," he said. "Because you are here." I looked away for a second, just a second, because hearing that out loud did something I had not prepared for. It made the past feel closer than it should. It made the space between who we were and who we had become feel smaller than it should. and that was dangerous in ways that had nothing to do with the people outside this room. That is exactly what I was trying to avoid, I said under my breath. And yet here we are. His voice was quieter now, but there was something underneath it, something that had not been there before, something that sounded less like control and more like truth. I turned back to him slowly, and for the first time since I walked in, I let myself really look at him, not as the man who controlled the city, not as the man who signed the papers that declared me gone, but as the man I had once known before everything became complicated, before everything became strategic, before everything became something we could not fix. You should not trust me in this, I said. His brow lifted slightly, not in surprise, but in interest. Explain. I hesitated, then stepped closer, closing the space between us the way he had done earlier, because some truths could not be said from a distance. Because if they are watching me, I said quietly, then everything I do is part of their plan. Every place I go, every decision I make, including coming here. His eyes narrowed just slightly, the implication settling in. You think this is not random. I know it is not, I replied. They do not make mistakes like that. Silence stretched again, but this time it was heavier, filled with a realization neither of us could ignore. If I was right, then this meeting, this moment, this collision of past and present, it had not just happened. It had been allowed to happen, designed to happen. Then they wanted you here, he said slowly. With me. I nodded once. Yes. The word felt final, like a door closing somewhere far away that we could not reach anymore. His gaze held mine, and I could see it happening. The shift from reaction to strategy, from emotion to decision. The same shift that had built everything around him. The same shift that made him dangerous in ways most people never understood. Then we stop reacting, he said quietly, and we start deciding. I felt a small, unexpected flicker of something I had not allowed myself in a long time. Not relief. Not safety. Something closer to certainty. You are not stepping back, I said. It was not a question. He shook his head once. No. I let out a slow breath, accepting it, because arguing would not change it, because nothing ever changed his decisions once they were made. Then we do this carefully, I said. His expression softened just slightly, not in weakness, but in agreement. Carefully, he repeated. And for the first time since I knocked on his door, I realized something I had not planned for, something I had not prepared for, something that changed everything moving forward. I was not alone in this anymore. And that might be the most dangerous thing of all. Then we stopped being predictable, I said, the words coming out slower than I expected, because saying them meant accepting something I had avoided for 3 years, that this was no longer about staying hidden, it was about stepping into something I did not fully understand, and Adrian was already watching me like he had been waiting for that shift. We already are, he replied quietly. I frowned slightly. No, we are reacting. That is what they expect. He tilted his head just enough to show interest. And what do you suggest instead? I held his gaze, steady, even as my mind moved faster than my voice, connecting pieces that had been scattered across months of running, across nights spent changing names, changing locations, changing patterns, always staying one step ahead, but never stopping to ask why they kept letting me stay ahead. We give them something they did not plan for, I said. His expression sharpened. Which is, I exhaled slowly. We stay visible. Silence. Not confusion. Not disbelief. Calculation. Adrian did not reject the idea. He examined it, turning it over the way he did with everything that mattered, looking for weakness, for leverage, for outcome. You have spent 3 years trying to disappear, he said, and now you want to do the opposite. I nodded once. Because disappearing only works when they do not want you to be seen. But they found me again, which means hiding is no longer the advantage. His gaze narrowed slightly. So you think visibility is? I think unpredictability is, I corrected. Visibility is just the tool. He was quiet for a moment, and I could almost see the map forming in his mind. The way he took incomplete information and built structure out of it. The way he turned uncertainty into strategy, and when he finally spoke, his voice was lower, more focused. If they wanted you here, with me, then they are watching this building. I nodded. Yes. Which means anything we do inside it is already part of their observation. Exactly. Another pause. Then a small shift. Decision. Then we do not stay here, he said. I felt something tighten in my chest, Not fear, not exactly, but awareness, because leaving this room meant stepping fully into whatever was waiting outside, and there would be no controlled environment, no contained space, no illusion of distance. You were sure about that? I said quietly. He did not hesitate. Yes. Of course he did not. Adrian never hesitated once he saw the path forward. I looked toward the door for a second, imagining the hallway, the cameras, the quiet presence that might still be lingering just out of sight, and I felt the weight of every decision that led to this moment press against me again. Then we do it carefully, I said. We do everything carefully, he replied. Then he moved. Not fast, not rushed, just deliberate. He crossed the room, reaching for his jacket draped over the back of a chair, sliding it on with the same controlled ease that made everything he did look effortless, even when it was not, and I realized then that this was not new to him. This shift, this movement from stillness to action, he had lived in this space long before I ever stepped into it. Stay close, he said without looking at me. Not a command, not exactly, but something close to it. I hesitated for half a second, just long enough to remind myself who I had become, just long enough to remember that I had survived without him, that I had made decisions without him, that I had stayed alive without his protection, and then I stepped forward anyway. Because this was different. Because this was no longer just about me. Because whatever was moving around us had already connected us whether we liked it or not. He reached the door and paused, his hand resting lightly against it, not opening it yet, just listening again, just confirming what he already suspected, and I watched him, really watched him, the way he stood, the way he breathed, the way nothing about him looked tense even though everything about this situation should have been, and I understood something I had not fully understood before. Adrian did not control chaos by fighting it. He controlled it by refusing to be moved by it. He opened the door. The hallway was quiet. Too quiet. Clean. Still. The kind of quiet that looks normal until you realize it is too perfect, too untouched, like a stage waiting for something to happen. He stepped out first. Of course he did. I followed half a step behind, close enough to feel the shift in the air as we moved into the open space, close enough to see the subtle ways people in the distance adjusted without realizing it, the way staff members glanced up and then quickly looked away, the way the environment responded to his presence without needing to be told. Do not look around too much, he said under his breath, just low enough for only me to hear. It makes you easier to read. I kept my gaze forward. I am not the one they are watching, I replied. They are watching both of us now, he said. That landed. Harder than I expected. Because it was true. Because there was no separation anymore. Because whatever line I had tried to keep between my world and his had already been erased. We moved toward the elevator, our steps measured, unhurried, controlled, like this was just another night, just another exit, just another movement through a building that belonged to him. And for anyone watching from a distance, that was exactly what it looked like. But I felt it. The attention, the awareness, the invisible thread connecting this moment to something larger, something still unfolding, something we had just stepped directly into. The elevator doors opened with a soft chime, and we stepped inside together, the space closing around us, reflective walls catching fragments of our silhouettes from every angle. And for a second it felt like we were suspended between floors, between decisions, between past and future, with no clear lines separating them. Adrian pressed the button for the ground level, his expression unreadable in the reflection. Once we step out of this building, he said quietly, everything changes. I looked at him, really looked this time, and for the first time since I knocked on his door, I allowed myself to acknowledge what that meant. It already has, I replied. The elevator began to move, smooth, silent, carrying us downward into something neither of us could fully predict. And as the numbers above the door counted down, I felt a realization settle deep in my chest, clear and unavoidable. This was not the moment everything started. This was the moment everything we had tried to avoid finally caught up to us. The elevator slowed before it stopped, just slightly, just enough to feel it in my chest before the soft chime announced our arrival. And in that half second of suspension, I realized something I had not allowed myself to think about until now. There was no version of what came next where things went back to how they were, not for me, not for him, not for whatever was watching us from the outside. And when the doors opened, the world did not rush in, it waited. The lobby stretched out in front of us, polished marble, soft lighting, quiet conversations that faded the moment Adrian stepped forward, because even in a space designed for discretion, his presence shifted the air, subtle but undeniable, and I felt it again, that invisible line forming around us, that quiet awareness that we were no longer just moving through the building. We were being observed moving through it. "Walk like you belong here," he said under his breath, his voice low enough that no one else would hear, but clear enough that it anchored something in me immediately. I straightened slightly, adjusting my pace to match his, controlled, steady, not too fast, not too slow, because this was not about escaping. It was about not looking like we needed to. My reflection caught briefly in one of the mirrored columns as we passed, the Maid uniform still in place, still part of the disguise that had worked up until now. But suddenly it felt different, less like protection and more like a signal, like something that could be traced if someone knew how to look for it. "We need to change that," he said, as if he had followed the exact same thought. I did not look at him. "I know." We kept moving, crossing the lobby with the kind of quiet confidence that made people step aside without realizing they were doing it. And I felt it again, that shift in the room, that subtle adjustment that came from years of him owning spaces like this without ever needing to announce it. The glass doors ahead reflected the city lights beyond, blurred and distant, and for a moment I focused on that instead of the weight pressing in from all sides. Instead of the awareness that every step we took was being noted somewhere by someone we could not see. "There will be a car waiting," he said. "Not the one they expect." I glanced at him briefly. "You already arranged that." It was not a question. He shook his head once. "I always do." Of course he did. The doors opened automatically as we approached, the night air cool against my skin, sharper than the controlled climate inside, and the sound of the city returned all at once. Distant traffic, voices, the low hum of movement that never really stopped, and for a second it almost felt normal, almost felt like the world outside had not shifted in the same way everything inside me had. But that feeling did not last, because the moment we stepped onto the sidewalk, I felt it again. That awareness, that pressure, not visible, not obvious, but there, watching, waiting. Adrian did not pause. He did not scan the street or adjust his pace. He simply walked forward like this was his territory, like nothing outside that building could challenge that, and I stayed close, matching him step for step, because any hesitation now would be noticed, any break in rhythm would give away more than we could afford. A black sedan pulled up to the curb with perfect timing, not early, not late, just exactly when it needed to be there, and the driver stepped out without looking at us directly, opening the rear door with a quiet efficiency that matched everything about this moment. Adrian did not break stride. He guided me toward the car with a subtle shift of his hand, not touching, not forcing, just directing, and I slid into the back seat without a word, the interior dim, controlled, familiar in a way that made everything outside feel even more distant. He followed a second later, the door closing with a soft, final sound that cut off the city noise completely. For a moment, neither of us spoke. The car pulled away from the curb smoothly, merging into traffic without drawing attention, without hesitation, and I watched the building disappear in the reflection of the window, growing smaller, less significant, until it was just another structure among hundreds, and yet I knew that what had happened inside it would not stay contained there. "They saw us leave," I said quietly. Adrian did not look at me. "Yes. Then they will follow." "Probably." His tone did not change, did not carry urgency or concern, just acknowledgement, like this was expected, like this was already accounted for. I turned slightly toward him, studying his profile in the low light, trying to understand how he could remain this steady, this controlled, when everything about this situation should have been unpredictable. "You are not concerned," I said. He glanced at me then, just briefly. "Concern is not useful." I almost smiled at that, not because it was funny, but because it was exactly what I remembered, exactly who he had always been, someone who did not waste energy on things that did not change outcomes. "Then what is?" I asked. His gaze returned to the window. "Positioning." The words settled into the space between us, simple, precise, loaded with meaning, and I understood it immediately, because that was what this was now. Not running, not hiding, not reacting, but positioning ourselves in a way that shifted whatever game was already in motion. Where are we going? I asked. A slight pause. Then, somewhere they do not expect you to go. I leaned back slightly, letting that sink in, because unpredictability had always been the one advantage I still had, the one thing that had kept me ahead for as long as it did, and now he was taking that concept and expanding it, shaping it into something larger, something more deliberate. The city moved around us, lights passing in blurred streaks across the window, intersections slipping by, each turn carefully chosen, each movement intentional, and I realized then that this was no longer about avoiding them. This was about drawing them somewhere else. You are not just leaving, I said quietly. You are leading them. He did not respond immediately, but the slight shift in his expression told me everything I needed to know. If they want to watch, he said finally, then we give them something worth watching. I let out a slow breath, feeling the weight of that settle in, because that meant we were no longer trying to stay ahead of whatever was coming. We were stepping directly into it. And for the first time since this started, I felt something unexpected rise under the tension, under the uncertainty, under the quiet fear I refused to name. Not control, not safety, something sharper, something closer to readiness. Because whatever came next, it was not going to be hidden anymore. And neither were we. The city lights stretched into long lines across the window as the car moved faster, smoother, like it had already memorized the path ahead. And I kept my gaze forward even though every instinct told me to look back, to check, to confirm whether we were being followed. But Adrian's voice echoed in my head before I could move. Do not look around too much. It makes you easier to read. So I stayed still, breathing slow, counting the rhythm of the tires against the asphalt instead of the questions building in my chest. How long have they been tracking you like this? He asked, his voice low but steady, cutting through the silence without urgency. I took a second before answering, not because I did not know, but because saying it out loud meant admitting how close this had come before I stepped back into his world. Long enough to learn my patterns, I said. Not long enough to predict all of them. He nodded once, absorbing that, processing it the way he did everything else, turning information into structure, into leverage, into something usable. And tonight, he continued, you broke your pattern. I glanced at him briefly. Yes. His eyes did not leave the window. Good. The words settled heavier than I expected, because it meant he was not just reacting anymore. He was adjusting the entire frame of the situation, shifting it from defense to something else entirely. You said they do not move fast, he added. Which means if they are following now, they are not trying to stop us. I felt that land immediately, the logic clicking into place, the realization forming before I could stop it. They are trying to see where we go. Exactly. Silence again. But this one felt sharper, more focused, like everything was narrowing toward a single point we had not reached yet. The car turned left, then right, each movement smooth, intentional, and I noticed it then, the pattern of the route, not direct, not random, something in between, something designed to reveal without fully exposing, and I leaned back slightly, letting that realization settle. You are testing them, I said quietly. He did not deny it. I am confirming them. I exhaled slowly, because that meant this was no longer theoretical, no longer a possibility. This was real. This was happening now. And whatever had been watching me for the past 3 years had just expanded its focus to include him. If they are patient, I said, they will not make a move tonight. No, he agreed. They will wait until they understand what we are doing. I turned my head slightly, just enough to see his reflection in the dark glass, sharp, controlled, unreadable, and I realized something I had not fully processed before. He was not just stepping into this. He was stepping ahead of it. Then we need to give them something to misunderstand, I said. His gaze flicked toward me, brief but precise. Go on. I hesitated for half a second, organizing the thought as it formed, because this was not about guessing anymore. It was about shaping perception, about controlling what they thought they were seeing. If they think I came back to you, I said slowly, then they will assume this is personal. He watched me now fully, and it is not. I shook my head. Not in the way they expect. So we let them believe that. We let them think I came back because of us, because of what we were, because I needed something from you. His expression did not change, but something in his eyes sharpened, interest layered over calculation. And while they are focused on that, I continued, they missed the actual reason. Silence. Then, a small shift. Approval. Not spoken. Not obvious. But there. You are suggesting we become the distraction, he said. I am suggesting we use what they think they understand against them. I corrected. He considered that for a moment, then nodded once. That can work. The car slowed slightly as it approached an intersection, the red light casting a faint glow through the window. And for a second, everything felt suspended again, like the moment in the elevator, like the second before the door opened, like the space between decisions where nothing had happened yet, but everything was about to. There is one problem, he said. I looked at him. What? His gaze held mine, steady, unflinching. They might not be wrong. The words landed harder than anything else he had said, not because they were loud, but because they were true in a way I had been avoiding since I stepped into his room. I felt it immediately, the shift in my chest, the pull of something I had buried under layers of logic and survival and distance, something that did not belong in this situation, but refused to stay quiet now that it had been named. That is not part of the plan, I said, my voice quieter than before. He did not look away. It does not have to be part of the plan to be real. The light turned green. The car moved forward again, and I turned my gaze back to the window, because holding his eyes any longer would have meant acknowledging something I was not ready to face. Not here, not now, not when everything else was already shifting around us. We stay focused, I said, more to myself than to him. We do not let that interfere. We do not let anything interfere, he agreed. But there was something in his tone now, something that had not been there before, something that made it clear this was no longer just strategy, no longer just positioning, no longer just a game of observation and response. This was becoming something else, something closer, something more complicated. The car turned again, leaving the main streets behind, moving into quieter roads, less traffic, fewer lights, and I felt the change immediately. The shift from visibility to controlled isolation, from public space to something more contained, more deliberate. Where are we going? I asked. He looked ahead, not at me. Somewhere they will not expect you to feel safe. The words settled into me slowly, and I realized what he meant. Not safety in the way I had defined it for the past 3 years, not distance or hiding or disappearing, but something else entirely, something I had not allowed myself to consider since the night everything changed. And where is that? I asked quietly. This time, he did look at me, just for a second, just long enough for something unspoken to pass between us. With me, he said. And in that moment, I understood the real shift that had been happening since I knocked on his door, the thing I had been trying not to see, the thing I could not ignore anymore. This was no longer just about surviving what was coming. This was about what it meant to stand next to him again, knowing exactly what that cost, and choosing it anyway. The car slowed again, but this time it did not feel like a transition. It felt like an arrival, like something we had been moving toward without fully naming it had finally taken shape. And when I looked out the window, I recognized the street before I could stop myself, the curve of the road, the line of trees spaced too evenly to be natural, the quiet that did not belong to the rest of the city. My breath caught for half a second. No, I said under my breath. Adrian did not look at me. Yes. The gate ahead opened before we reached it, smooth, silent, like it had been expecting us, and the car passed through without slowing, the outside world slipping away behind us as if it had never been there in the first place. I leaned back slowly, my pulse no longer steady, because this place was not just somewhere they would not expect me to feel safe. It was somewhere I had once called home, somewhere I had left behind with the rest of a life I had convinced myself was over. You should not have brought me here, I said quietly. This time, he turned his head slightly, just enough for me to see the edge of his expression. There is nowhere else that is mine enough, he replied. The words settled into me deeper than they should have, because I knew what he meant. This was not just a location. This was a statement, a boundary, a place where his control was not questioned, not negotiated, not shared. The car came to a stop in front of the house, and for a moment neither of us moved, the engine idling softly, the night pressing in around us, and I felt it again, that shift between past and present, the thin line that separated who we were then from who we were now, and how easily it blurred when we stood in the same place again. They will trace this, I said, more quietly now. Eventually, he agreed. But not immediately. I turned toward him fully. You are taking a risk. He met my gaze without hesitation. So are you. that ended the argument before it could begin. The driver stepped out, opening the door with the same quiet efficiency as before, and Adrian moved first. Stepping out into the night like this was just another arrival. Just another moment in a long line of controlled decisions. And I followed a second later. The air cooler here, cleaner, quieter in a way that made every sound feel sharper. The house stood in front of us, unchanged, the same structure, the same lines, the same presence that had once felt like stability and now felt like something else entirely, something heavier, something layered with everything that had happened since I walked away from it. I took one step forward, then another, my movements slower now, not because I was uncertain, but because every inch of this place carried memory, and memory was dangerous in ways that had nothing to do with the people watching from the outside. You remember it exactly, he said behind me. I did not turn. Some things do not fade. He was quiet for a moment. Then, no, they do not. We moved toward the door together, the space between us smaller now, not because we had closed it, but because the past had. And when he opened the door, the interior lights came on automatically, revealing the same clean lines, the same controlled design, the same careful absence of anything unnecessary, and yet everything felt different because I was not the same person walking into it. I stepped inside first this time, not waiting, not hesitating, because standing outside would have been worse. Standing outside would have meant choosing distance again, and I had already crossed that line. The door closed behind us, sealing the space, cutting off the outside world once more, but this time it did not feel like protection. It felt like a pause, like a moment carved out of something larger that was still moving toward us. I turned slowly, taking in the room, the furniture, the quiet details that had not changed, and for a second I could almost see it the way it had been, before everything fractured, before everything became something we could not fix, and I forced that thought down immediately, because this was not about then. This was about now. You still keep it the same, I said. He stepped further into the room, setting his jacket aside with the same controlled motion as always. I do not change things that work. I let out a breath that almost sounded like a laugh, but there was no humor in it. That is not why you kept it like this. His gaze shifted to me, sharper now. Then why? I met his eyes, steady, because there was no point in pretending otherwise. Because you expected me to come back. The silence that followed was different from all the others, heavier, more personal, and for the first time since this began, I saw something in his expression that had nothing to do with strategy, nothing to do with control, something that belonged entirely to the space between us. No, he said quietly. I expected you to be alive. The words hit harder than I expected, because they stripped away everything else, all the layers of decision and consequence and distance, leaving only the truth underneath, the part neither of us had been willing to say out loud until now. I looked away first, because holding that moment would have meant stepping into something I was not ready to face. Not yet. Not when everything else was still moving around us. This is not why we are here, I said, my voice quieter again. No, he agreed. It is not. But neither of us moved immediately. Neither of us broke the space that had formed between us, because even as the situation outside continued to build, even as whatever was watching us adjusted to this new position, something else had shifted inside this room, something that had nothing to do with them and everything to do with us. Finally, he spoke again, his tone returning to something more controlled, more deliberate. You said they were building something, he said, that they needed you at the center of it. I nodded once. Yes. He stepped closer, not enough to invade my space, but enough to narrow the distance, enough to make the conversation feel more immediate. Then it is time you tell me what they are building. I held his gaze, feeling the weight of that question settle fully, because this was the part one had not wanted to say out loud, the part that changed everything, the part that made this more than just survival or positioning or strategy. This was the part that explained why I could not stay hidden anymore. They are not building something, I said slowly. They are replacing something. His expression did not change, but his attention sharpened instantly. What? I did not look away. You. For a second, the room did not feel like it belonged to either of us anymore. The word hung between us, sharp and impossible to take back, and I saw it land in real time. The shift behind Adrian's eyes, not shock, not disbelief, but something far more dangerous, recognition meeting calculation at the same time. Explain, he said, his voice lower now, stripped of everything unnecessary, the way it always became when something mattered. I did not move. They are not trying to destroy what you built, I said carefully. They are trying to take it without breaking it. His gaze held mine, steady, unflinching. That is not easy to do. I shook my head slightly. That is why it is taking time. Silence stretched, but this time it was structured, like both of us were standing inside a framework that was finally becoming visible. They have been placing people, I continued. Not obvious ones. Not loud ones. The kind that do not draw attention. The kind that fit into existing systems without disrupting them. The kind that become necessary before anyone realizes they are there. His expression did not change, but his attention sharpened in a way I had not seen yet tonight. Inside my operations, he said. Adjacent to them, I corrected. At first, then closer. Always just close enough to observe, to understand, to map out how everything connects. He exhaled slowly, and I knew he was already retracing steps, already identifying gaps, already pulling threads together that had seemed unrelated before. And you saw this happening, he said. Before I did. I nodded once. Because I was not part of it the same way you were. I could see the edges where things did not align. His jaw tightened slightly. And instead of telling me, you disappeared. The accusation was quiet, but it was there, layered under everything else, and I met it without looking away. Because telling you would not have changed how they moved, I said. It would have only made you react faster. And they were waiting for that. He did not respond immediately, but I could see it, the way that answer settled into place, the way it forced him to consider something he did not like, that reacting, even correctly, might have been exactly what they wanted. So you removed yourself from the equation, he said. I removed their leverage, I replied. Another pause. Then, and now you are back in it. I let out a breath, slower this time. Because they adjusted. His eyes narrowed slightly. How? I hesitated for just a fraction of a second, because this was the part that changed everything. The part that made this no longer theoretical, no longer distant. They stopped looking for me, I said, and started looking for what I knew. That landed differently. I saw it in the way his posture shifted, the way his focus sharpened again, the way the entire situation restructured itself around that single detail. Information, he said. Not just information, I corrected. Access. Patterns. Weak points that are not obvious unless you have seen the system from both sides. His gaze held mine. And you have. Yes. Silence again. But this time it was heavier, because now we were no longer talking about possibility, we were talking about intention, about something that had been moving quietly for years and was now close enough to matter. So they do not need you to stay hidden anymore, he said slowly. They need you to be found. I nodded once. Exactly. The room felt smaller for a second. Not physically, but in the way everything had narrowed down to a single, unavoidable truth. And by coming here, he continued, you gave them a direct line to me. I did not deny it. Yes. Another silence. But this one was sharper, more immediate, because there was no way around that part, no way to soften it, no way to pretend it had not already happened. Then why come at all? He asked, his voice still controlled, but edged now with something more personal. Why not keep running? I held his gaze, steady, because this was the question I had been asking myself the entire way here, the one I had not fully answered until I stood in front of his door. Because running stopped working, I said. And because if they are replacing you, then staying away does not protect you anymore. His expression did not change, but something in his eyes did, something that looked less like calculation and more like understanding, not complete, not finished, but enough to shift the direction of everything that came next. You are telling me this is not about you anymore, he said. It was never just about me, I replied. The words settled into the space between us, and for a moment neither of us spoke, because there was nothing left to clarify, nothing left to soften, only the reality that whatever had been building was now intersecting directly with both of us. Finally, Adrian moved, not abruptly, not dramatically, just a single step closer, enough to close the distance slightly, enough to make it clear this was no longer a conversation happening across space. This was something we were both standing inside now. Then we changed the structure, he said quietly. I frowned slightly. How? His gaze did not leave mine. We stopped them from replacing me by making it impossible to replicate what I am. I studied him for a second, because that was not a simple statement. That was a shift in strategy, a move that would affect everything connected to him, everything he had built, everything they were trying to understand. That makes you more visible, I said. More exposed. Yes, he agreed. And less predictable. I felt that click into place, the same way everything else had tonight, the same way every realization had built on the last, until there was no space left for doubt. Then we are not just responding anymore, I said. We are forcing them to move before they are ready. He nodded once. Exactly. Silence again. But this time it felt different, not heavy, not uncertain, but focused, like the shape of what came next was finally becoming clear. There is still something you are not telling me, he said after a moment. I stilled slightly. What? His eyes did not waver. If they are replacing me, then they have already chosen who. The question hung there, precise, unavoidable, and for a second I considered not answering, considered holding that piece back just a little longer, but that would have been pointless now, because we were already past the point where half-truths helped anything. Yes, I said quietly. His expression did not change. Who? I exhaled slowly, feeling the weight of it settle fully before I spoke. Someone you already trust. And in that moment, I knew the real danger had not even started yet. The air in the room changed the second those words settled between us. Someone you already trust. It did not echo. It did not linger. It locked into place like a piece that had always belonged there, waiting to be seen, and Adrian did not react the way most people would have. He did not ask immediately. He did not step back. He did not show surprise. He went still, completely still. The kind of stillness that meant something was happening beneath the surface, something fast, precise, and dangerous. Say it, he said quietly. Not demanding, not loud, just inevitable. I held his gaze, because looking away would have made it weaker, would have made it sound like doubt, and there was no doubt left in this. I do not have a name, I said. His eyes narrowed slightly. Then you do not know. I shook my head once. I know enough. That answer did not satisfy him. Of course it did not. Adrian did not operate on partial truths, not when the stakes were this high. Enough is not useful, he said. I stepped closer, just slightly, enough to make sure he heard what I was about to say exactly as I meant it. Enough to know it is not random, I said. Enough to know they are not guessing. Enough to know this person has access to things no one outside your inner circle should have. That landed. I saw it in the way his jaw tightened, in the way his focus shifted inward for a second, like he was pulling up names, faces, patterns, years of decisions, years of trust built slowly and deliberately. How long? He asked. I did not hesitate. Long enough that it is not new. Silence followed that, but it was not empty. It was structured, filled with the weight of realization forming in real time. And for the first time since I had walked into this house, I saw something in him that had nothing to do with control. Not fear. Adrian did not fear things like this. Something closer to recognition of risk. Then they have been inside for years, he said. Yes. Another pause. Then, and you are just telling me now. There it was. Not anger. Not accusation. Something quieter. Something that carried more weight because it was not loud. I met it directly. I tried to tell you without saying it, I said. Before I left. His gaze snapped back to mine, sharper now. When I swallowed once, because this part did not belong to strategy. This part belonged to memory, to something we had both chosen not to look at too closely. The last week, I said, before everything ended. He did not speak, but I saw it, the shift, the connection forming, the past aligning with the present in a way that could not be ignored anymore. You said something about patterns, he said slowly. About things not lining up. I nodded. You thought I was overthinking. His expression did not change, but something behind it did. I thought you were looking for problems that were not there, he said. And I thought you were not seeing the ones that were. I replied quietly. The words settled between us, heavier than anything else we had said so far, because they were not just about the situation we were in now. They were about the moment everything broke, the moment we chose different ways of seeing the same reality, and what that cost us. He looked away first this time, just for a second, just long enough to reset something before his focus returned, sharper than before. Then we correct that mistake, he said. Not emotionally, not defensively, strategically. That was who he was. Even now, especially now, we identify who has that level of access and we narrow it down. I shook my head slightly. It is not that simple. His gaze hardened. It never is. I stepped back, just enough to give the thought space, because this was where most people would get it wrong. This was where logic would lead you to the obvious answer, and the obvious answer was exactly what they wanted. If it were obvious, I said, you would have already seen it. He did not argue that. He could not. Then what am I missing? He asked. I took a slow breath. It is not just access, I said. It is timing. His attention sharpened again. Explain. I nodded slightly, organizing the thought as it formed. They are not using this person all the time, I said. Only when it matters. Only when something specific needs to be known or adjusted. That is why it does not stand out. That is why it blends in. He absorbed that, and I could see it. The way the structure in his mind shifted, the way the problem changed shape, becoming something more precise, more difficult, more dangerous. So, I am not looking for someone who always has access, he said slowly. I am looking for someone who uses it selectively. Yes. Silence again. Then a small shift. That narrows it, he said. I held his gaze. Not enough. He tilted his head slightly. Then what does? I hesitated for just a second, because this was the part that mattered most, the part that turned suspicion into something else entirely. Trust, I said quietly. His expression did not change. That is obvious. I shook my head. No, not trust in the way you think. Not loyalty. Not history. I mean the kind of trust that makes you stop checking. That landed differently. I saw it. The realization. The shift. The moment something clicked into place that had not been visible before. The person I do not question, he said. Yes. The room felt tighter for a second, like the walls had moved in just slightly, not physically, but in the way everything had narrowed down to something specific, something unavoidable. That list is small, he said. It should be, I replied. Another pause. Then, and you think one of them is not who they appear to be. I did not look away. I think one of them is exactly who they appear to be, I said. That is why it works. He held my gaze for a long second, and I knew in that moment that everything had shifted again, not just the situation, not just the strategy, but something deeper, something more personal, something that cut closer to the core of who he was and how he operated than anything else we had said tonight. Then we do not confront them, he said finally. I blinked once. No, his voice was steady, certain. We do not let them know we see them. I nodded slowly, because that was the only move that made sense now, the only way to turn this back, the only way to regain control of something that had been quietly slipping for years. We watch them, I said. We learn what they are actually doing. He nodded once. And then we decide what they are worth. Silence followed, but this time it was different. Not heavy, not uncertain, but sharp, focused, like a blade finally aligned with its purpose. I let out a slow breath, feeling the shift settle fully into place, because this was no longer about surviving what was coming. This was about stepping into it with clarity, with intention, with the understanding that the real danger was not outside this house. It was already inside his world. And now, finally, he could see it. The plan settled between us like something alive, something that would either hold or break, depending on how carefully we moved. And for a moment neither of us spoke, because we both understood what it meant to suspect someone close, what it meant to look at a familiar face and question whether it had always been exactly what it appeared to be. I walked slowly toward the center of the room, my steps quieter now, more deliberate, because this part required clarity, not just instinct. There is something else, I said. Adrian's attention shifted instantly. What? I stopped a few feet from him, close enough that the distance felt intentional, not accidental. They are not just observing you, I said. They are studying how you respond. His expression did not change, but I saw the recognition settle in immediately. So every decision I make becomes part of their data, he said. Yes. I nodded. Every reaction, every adjustment, every move you think is yours alone. Silence followed. Heavier this time, because that meant something deeper than infiltration. It meant adaptation. It meant whoever was behind this was not just watching him, they were learning him. Then we give them something wrong to learn, he said quietly. I felt a small shift in my chest at that, not surprise, but confirmation, because that was the only way this could work, the only way to break a pattern that had been forming for years. Exactly, I replied. We become inconsistent. He studied me for a second, not questioning, but refining. Not random, he said. Controlled inconsistency. I nodded once. Enough to disrupt their expectations, not enough to lose structure. He stepped closer then, closing the space between us just slightly. And for the first time since we entered this house, the tension in the room felt aligned instead of divided, like we were no longer standing on opposite sides of the same problem, but on the same side of something much larger. Then we start with something simple, he said. Something they can see. I frowned slightly. Like what? His gaze held mine, steady, deliberate. You. The word landed immediately. I did not move. Explain. He tilted his head just slightly, the way he did when he was already 2 steps ahead. If they believe you came back because of me, then we reinforce that, he said. Publicly. I exhaled slowly, feeling the implication unfold in real time. You want them to think this is personal, I said. I want them to believe it is predictable, he corrected. Because if they think they understand the reason, they stop looking for the real one. That made sense. Too much sense. And that was exactly why it was dangerous. That means I stay close to you, I said quietly. He did not hesitate. Yes. I looked away for a second, not because I disagreed, but because I understood what that would mean, not just strategically, but personally. Because proximity changes things, proximity removes distance, and distance had been the only thing keeping everything else contained. That is what they want, I said. Not like this, he replied. I turned back to him. What is different? His expression did not change, but his voice lowered slightly, enough to carry something that was not just strategy. This time, we know they are watching. That was the difference. Awareness. Intention. Control. I nodded slowly. Because he was right. Because this was no longer reactive. This was deliberate. This was choosing the narrative instead of being pulled into it. Then we need to be careful how real it looks, I said. His gaze held mine. It has to look real enough. Silence followed. And for a second the weight of that statement settled in a way neither of us acknowledged out loud. Because there were layers to it that had nothing to do with the people watching us. Layers that belonged to something we had not resolved, something we had not finished. There is another problem, I said after a moment. If they are studying your reactions, then they already know how you respond to me. His eyes did not leave mine. Not anymore. The words were quiet, but they carried something deeper than strategy, something that suggested change, something that suggested the version of him they had been observing might not be the version standing here now. People change, he added. I let out a slow breath. Not always in ways that are predictable. That is the point, he said. I studied him for a second, really studied him, because this was where things shifted again, not just externally, but internally, because whatever we were about to do required more than coordination. It required trust, the kind we had broken before, the kind we had not rebuilt, the kind that could not be faked under pressure. Then we set boundaries, I said. He tilted his head slightly. What kind? I held his gaze. We decide what is real and what is not before we start. That landed differently. I saw it in the way his expression sharpened, not in resistance, but in understanding, because this was not just about strategy anymore. This was about control over something that could easily become something else if we did not define it first. And if the line blurs, he asked quietly. I did not hesitate. Then we stepped back. Silence. Then a small shift in his posture, something that looked almost like agreement. Fine, he said. The word was simple, but it carried weight, because it meant we were setting terms, not just for the situation, but for ourselves. I nodded once, feeling something settle into place, something that felt like structure, like clarity, like the only way this could work without collapsing under its own complexity. Then we start tomorrow, I said. His gaze moved briefly toward the window, toward the darkness beyond it, toward whatever was still watching from the outside, and then back to me. No, he said quietly. I frowned slightly. Why? His expression did not change. Because they are already watching now. The realization hit immediately, sharp and undeniable, because of course they were, because this had never stopped, because the moment we stepped into that car, the moment we left the building, the moment we came here, it had all been part of the same observation. Then we have already started, I said. He nodded once. Yes. Silence followed, but this time it felt different, not heavy, not uncertain, but charged, like everything was in motion now, like every step forward would matter in ways we could not fully predict yet. I took a slow breath, steadying myself, because this was it. The moment where planning turned into action, where theory became reality, where everything we had said would either hold or fall apart, depending on what we did next. Then what is the first move? I asked. He did not look away. We let them believe they are winning. And in that moment, I understood the real danger was not just the person inside his circle. It was the fact that we were about to play a game where losing on purpose might be the only way to win. We let them believe they are winning, and the moment that decision settled, everything around me felt sharper, clearer, like the world had shifted into focus in a way it had not before, because losing on purpose is not about giving up control. It is about redefining what control looks like, and Adrian stood there like he had already accepted that, like he had already stepped into the version of this where every move we made would be seen, interpreted, and misread exactly the way we needed it to be. Then we do not rush anything, I said quietly. He nodded once. We slow it down. The words carried weight, because slowing down in a situation like this was not passive, it was deliberate. It was choosing patience over reaction. It was letting the other side think they were ahead when in reality they were being guided. I walked toward the window again, the glass cool under my fingertips, the darkness outside reflecting back a version of me I barely recognized anymore. Not the one who ran, not the one who disappeared, but someone standing still in the middle of something much bigger. They will expect movement, I said. Change. Pressure. Adrian stepped closer, not touching, but close enough that I could feel the shift in the space between us. Then we give them the opposite, he replied. Consistency. I turned slightly, frowning. That contradicts what we said before. He shook his head once. No, it completes it. Controlled inconsistency inside a pattern that looks stable from the outside. I let that settle, the logic unfolding piece by piece, because that meant we were not just reacting to their expectations, we were shaping them, feeding them something structured enough to trust, but flexible enough to hide what actually mattered. So they see stability, I said slowly, but they do not see what changes underneath it. Exactly. Silence followed, but it felt different now, not heavy, not uncertain, but aligned, like we were finally moving in the same direction without hesitation, without second-guessing. There is one more thing, I said after a moment. His attention shifted instantly. What? I hesitated, just for a second, because this part was not about strategy, not entirely. It was about something else, something harder to define, something that had been building quietly since the moment I knocked on his door. If we are going to do this, I said, we cannot keep separating what is real from what is not. His expression did not change, but his gaze sharpened slightly. Explain. I met his eyes, steady, even though something in my chest tightened. Because they are not just watching what we do, I said. They are watching how we are. The details. The way we look at each other. The pauses. The things we do not say. He did not interrupt. He did not look away. If any part of this feels forced, I continued, they will see it. Silence stretched between us, and for a moment I wondered if I had pushed too far, if I had crossed into something he would not accept. But then he spoke, his voice quieter now, but more certain than before. Then we do not force it. The simplicity of that answer caught me off guard, not because it was wrong, but because it left no room for anything else, no room for pretending, no room for distance disguised as control. That means, I said slowly, we stop pretending there is nothing here. His gaze held mine, unflinching. There never was nothing. The words landed deeper than anything else he had said tonight, because they stripped away the last layer of separation, the last excuse for keeping things defined and contained, and for a second everything else faded. The plan, the danger, the people watching from the outside, all of it pulled back just enough to reveal what had been sitting between us the entire time. I looked away first, not because I wanted to, but because holding that moment any longer would have meant stepping into something I was not sure I could control, and control was the only thing keeping this entire situation from collapsing. We stay focused, I said quietly. We stay precise. We do both, he replied. I let out a slow breath, grounding myself again, because this was not the time to get lost in anything that did not serve the plan. This was the time to move forward, to take everything we had just built and turn it into something real, something that could actually hold under pressure. Then tomorrow, I said, we make it visible. He nodded once. Yes. I turned back to him, fully now, no distance, no hesitation, because if we were going to do this, if we were going to step into something this controlled, this deliberate, then there could not be any doubt left between us. And after that, I added, we watch who reacts. His expression shifted slightly, not in surprise, but in approval. That will tell us more than anything else. Silence followed again. But this time it felt complete, like the plan had reached a point where it could stand on its own, where it did not need more words, more adjustments, more refinement, just execution. I moved past him slowly, heading toward the hallway, toward the part of the house that still felt unfamiliar despite everything. Because standing still now felt wrong. Standing still meant thinking too much, and thinking too much was not what we needed anymore. Naomi. His voice stopped me before I reached the end of the room. I turned back. He had not moved, but something in his posture had shifted, something quieter, something that had nothing to do with strategy. If this goes wrong, he said, it does not just affect me. I held his gaze. I know. A pause. Then why come back? The question was simple, but it carried everything underneath it, everything we had not said, everything we had avoided naming directly. And for a moment I considered giving him the strategic answer, the logical one, the one that fit neatly into everything else we had built tonight. Instead, I told him the truth. Because leaving you in the dark was the only mistake I could not live with. The words settled between us, quiet, final, and something in his expression shifted, not dramatically, not obviously, but enough that I saw it, enough that I felt it. Then do not make that mistake again, he said softly. I nodded once. I will not. And as I turned away again, moving deeper into the house, into whatever came next, I realized something I had been avoiding since the very beginning, something that changed everything in a way no plan could control. We were no longer just trying to survive what was coming. We were choosing to face it together. And that choice was either going to save us or destroy everything we had left.